Go. Oh, I should have been over there, right?
Good afternoon. My name is Jim Foster. I'm Executive Director of the City Club of Cleveland, and I'm pleased to welcome you to this important debate between candidates vying for Ohio's 16th Congressional District. The City Club is the oldest continuous forum in the country. We have a long and distinguished history of presenting political debates, which provide an opportunity for the audience here and throughout Ohio to be able to compare and contrast these two candidates. Each and every week throughout the year, the City Club presents interesting programs with informed speakers addressing the significant issues of the day. We would be pleased to welcome you as a supporter of the City Club in our ongoing mission of civic dialogue. Our broadcast partner is IdeaStream. Not only for today's program, but each week IdeaStream broadcasts the City Club forums live on 90.3 WCPN IdeaStream and Sunday mornings at 10 on WVIZ PBS IdeaStream. Television broadcasts of the City Club programs receive substantial support from Cleveland State University and PNC Bank. Now I'm pleased to turn it over to Mike McIntyre. Mike is our moderator for today's debate. Mike is a columnist for The Plain Dealer, writing the popular Tip-Off column, and host of WCPN's Sound of Ideas. Mike?
Thank you. Jim, thank you very much. I'm delighted to moderate this debate between candidates for U.S. Representative from Ohio's newly redrawn 16th Congressional District. Congressman Jim Renacci currently represents the 16th District and has served one term in the U.S. Congress. And Betty Sutton currently represents the Ohio's 13th District and has served for 3 terms in Congress. These 2 districts have been redrawn, and our 2 distinguished candidates are vying for the single seat that will be Ohio's 16th District in the 113th Congress beginning next January. And though both of you are incumbents, there are many folks in the new 16th who've not had an opportunity to vote or really hear from either of you in any previous general election. Our hope is that after this exercise, folks will have a clear understanding of where each of you stands and can cast an informed vote. That's not to say folks haven't heard a lot about you. As the Plain Dealer Sabrina Eaton reported yesterday on Cleveland.com, this race has been one of the nation's highest draws for outside spending, with $4.4 million spent by groups essentially to run attack ads against each of these candidates. And set your DVRs, because another couple $1 million is on its way. So again, it's refreshing to hear from and not just about these representatives at this forum. 2 key words I'm hoping you'll keep in mind, representatives, and that is specifics and contrasts. And if you can be specific in your answers and draw contrast to your opponent, we'll have accomplished our goal of enlightenment today. Let me set the ground rules quickly. The rules for the opening portion of this debate are: each representative has a total of 3 minutes for an opening statement. And after these opening words, we'll move into questions that I will ask, and then the traditional City Club audience questions. We're very pleased to welcome our audience with us here today and those listening to WCPN 90.3 IdeaStream or other broadcasts around the country. And I know many of you in the audience support one or the other of these candidates. We appreciate your giving everyone a chance to be heard. But just this once, it's your chance to be heard. You can show your support now for your candidates. Thank you. The order of presentation was determined by a drawing just a few minutes ago, and Congresswoman Sutton, you will present first.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the City Club of Cleveland for hosting this debate, and to our moderator, Mike McIntyre, and to our audience for participating in this important process. I want to start off by introducing myself. I grew up right here in Northeast Ohio. I'm the youngest of 6. My dad worked at the Boilermaker factory, and my mom worked at the local public library. And I grew up watching what happens when people work hard and they play by the rules. I've seen how great we can be when we invest in Ohio's people and our ingenuity. But far too often, middle-class families, like the middle-class family I grew up in, we've seen the rules changed. They've seen investments and opportunities packed up and shipped off to other countries. They've seen those at the very top get an unfair advantage, sometimes robbing them of an opportunity and a fair chance at the American dream. When big corporate lobbyists have a stranglehold on our government, that's the result we get. Washington has a lot of politicians who like to cozy up to lobbyists. Washington has a lot of politicians who are there to enrich themselves. That's not who I am, and that's not who I will ever be. That's why I introduced a bill to stop lobbyists from giving gifts to members of Congress, and why I have stood up to people on both sides of the aisle when they have violated the public's trust. It's why I worked to pass a bill to cut off insider trading by members of Congress who are using information to enrich themselves. And when I saw our brave troops who were being sent on extended tours of duty beyond their contract terms, I stood up and I fought to make sure that they were being fairly compensated and treated, because they deserve to have someone on their side. And when politicians, some said, let the auto industry go under, taking thousands of Ohio jobs with it, I said, no way, no how, because our workers are the best in the world, and they deserve to have someone on their side. We hear a lot of talk in Washington these days about protecting job creators, and I couldn't agree more. But we disagree about who creates jobs. I believe in simple economics, that jobs are created when demand for products is there, and demand is created by fighting for a vibrant middle class, not just by putting more wealth into the hands of those who are already super wealthy so they can hold on to it. I'm going to keep fighting for the real job creators and for Ohio's middle-class families who are outnumbered in Washington. Special interests have plenty of representation, but you can bet that this daughter of a Boilermaker is going to be there on your side representing you. Thank you.
A reminder on the applause, we'll be able to get through a lot more with the questions if we can just hold that. We've had our chance earlier, and then we'll obviously have a chance at the end of the program as well. Thank you very much, Congresswoman Sutton. And now Congressman Renacci, your 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. And I want to thank the City Club for holding this debate. I want to thank Congresswoman Sutton for being here with me to talk about our views and our differences. And I also want to thank Mike for being the moderator of this event. You know, clearly this election in 28 days is important for the 16th District, but it's really important because it represents two views. We have two basic views. My views came from my family, growing up in a blue-collar union family. My grandfather was a coal miner. My dad was a railroad worker. I understood what it meant to have to work in that situation, you know, a democratic union family. I understood what it was when my dad lost his job when I was 8 years old. I understood what it was and how tough it was to make a difference. And that's what actually was what started my idea of what America is all about. Because my dad always used to say, America is about opportunity. America is definitely about the future and the opportunity. And that was the difference for me. And I'm happy to say that I was able to create 1,500 jobs with that opportunity. I started my own business. First person to go to college in my family. Paid for it on my own. Drove a truck. Loaded truck. Did a lot of things. That's the difference. My opponent, her views come from being a career politician. She also had as she talked about, a family with a Boilermaker father, and I applaud her that she grew up in some of those same values. But again, the views are different. But this election isn't about either of us. It's not about me or it's not about her. You know what it's about? It's about the 23 million people who are looking for full-time employment right now. It's about the 47 million people that are on food stamps today. It's about the 50 million people who now really are poor. That's what this is about. That's what this election is about. And since 2009, it's about the increase in the amount of people that have become poor. It's also about the last 4 years of adding almost $5 trillion to our national debt. That's what it's about. It's not about Congresswoman Sutton or me. It's about those people. It's about making it better for them. It's about taking our economy and moving in a different direction. So what's really important as you look at both candidates after today and all the way to November 6th is you understand what they believe and what their views are. Congresswoman Sutton believes in bigger government. She believes in more spending. She'll call that investing, but it's really spending. She believes in more taxes. She believes in things that I don't agree with. I don't agree that government should be bigger. I don't agree that we should be spending more money. I'm concerned for our children and our grandchildren. I'm concerned for the debt we're putting on them. I'm concerned for that $16 trillion that continues to grow every day. That's the difference. So if you want bigger government, the decision is going to be easy. If you want more taxes, the decision here is going to be easy. But if you want somebody who wants to get America back to the people and make government smaller and less taxes, I hope I can earn your vote on November 6th. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Renacci. All right, we are now turning, thank you both for that opening statement. We're now turning to the moderated portion of the debate. Candidates will have 1 minute to respond to each question, and I'll reserve the right to ask a follow-up question to each of the candidates. Follow-up responses will be allowed a 30-second time frame. The first question is going to go starting with you, Congressman Renacci, and I'd like each of you to answer this question. Each have a minute for it. We've been talking a lot about jobs in this debate, and in fact, or in this campaign, and in fact, in this debate already. How would each of you go about creating more jobs for your district, and what role would the federal government play in that process? Mr. Renacci?
Well, the answer to this is the creation of jobs is not, government doesn't create jobs, businesses create jobs, entrepreneurs create jobs, people in the private sector create jobs. So what we need to do is we need to bring certainty and predictability back. I was a small business owner for 28 years. I understand what it is to create a job. I understand what it means to risk capital. And when government has more regulations, when government doesn't allow certainty and predictability, when government, let's face it, if you're a small business owner today, you don't know what your taxes are going to be in January. You don't know what new regulations are coming down the road. You don't know what your health care costs are going to be. You don't have any idea. So how can you ever get certainty and predictability when a government doesn't give us that? And that's one of the problems. We need to get certainty and predictability. The private sector needs to have certainty and predictability. When you get certainty and predictability, you're willing to create jobs. One of the things I've done over the last year is really get out and meet with the small business owners and listen to them.
And Congressman Sutton, same question.
Thank you. I have a plan called the American Jobs First Plan. And through that plan, we would level the playing field for American workers and American businesses. This is one of the things that we could do. We could strengthen our Buy American laws so that when we are investing on behalf of not just one individual or those at the very top, but on behalf of all of us in our infrastructure that also spurs greater economic development and strengthening manufacturing. We can do so by making sure that when we build that infrastructure, we can use American iron, steel, and manufactured goods to get those ripple effects and those good jobs for our folks. We can also close those loopholes that my opponent has consistently voted for that encourage outsourcing of our jobs and stop these bad trade deals, continuing to support bad trade deals as my opponent here has voted for 3 bad trade deals that are not going to serve Ohio well in the future. So those are a couple of very quick things that we could do. We could also rein in Chinese currency manipulation, something that I would ask my opponent to join me in calling on Speaker Boehner to put on the House floor, because that could mean 1 million jobs.
All right,
a million jobs we need.
Our time here. Thank you. Congressman Renacci, a follow-up to that previous question. You've mentioned predictability and certainty a lot on the campaign trail and in your answer here. You live in a country that's pretty evenly split politically. Is predictability and certainty a realistic goal?
Well, absolutely. Again, I grew up in the business field for 28 years. Certainty and predictability is available to us. We have to make sure that government gives us certainty and predictability. But we got to quit using political rhetoric. I mean, Congressman Sutton talked about loopholes. I'm a CPA. To send jobs overseas, I'd love for her to tell me one of those loopholes she's talking about. I don't know what those deductions are to send jobs overseas, those loopholes. I'd love to hear it someday. I believe that we need certainty and predictability for those job creators. She talked about what she believes. I believe the job creators are the ones that we should be listening to. We shouldn't be telling them.
Move on to the next question. What specifically would you do to attack the federal debt and deficit? Would tax increases of any kind be appropriate? And in your estimation, how quickly should we reach balanced spending in this country? Congresswoman Sutton, you're first.
Thank you very much. It is time for those at the very top to pay a fair share. Those who have done well in America need to do well by America. So those deep tax cuts that have existed for those at the very top of the spectrum, we can no longer afford those. So I would definitely allow those to expire. I also would close those loopholes for companies that are shipping jobs overseas. Those are important things that we can do to right this ship. The other thing is, I believe that the job creators, as I said, are the middle class. So we have to look out, and instead of having a budget that hits them and increases their burden, if we make sure that those at the top pay a fair share, invest in smart things like infrastructure and advanced manufacturing, get our people to work, tie the reduction of the deficit. We have a long-term deficit problem, but the way you get rid of it is to put people to work so that revenue keeps coming in. So I would focus on job creation, tie the unemployment numbers to the rate at which we reduce the deficit.
Congressman Renacci.
Well, again, we need to get the deficit down, and I think the key is to start looking at what we're spending. But raising taxes is not the answer. I mean, if you think about it, Washington, you should not want anybody to send any more money down to Washington until Washington learns how to fix what they're spending today. My goodness, if I held up a bucket and had the holes in it that Washington has and all the leaks and all the spending that's going on, you would say, why would anybody want to put more water in that bucket? Let's fix that bucket. That's the difference. Washington doesn't know how to spend the money they're getting already. We need to make sure that we look at every line item, and we need to see we are borrowing 40 cents on the dollar. For everything that we spend, we need to make sure that we look and say, is it worth borrowing money from China to do this? And those are the decisions we should be making.
This is a follow-up question. I'll start with you, Mr. Renacci. Part of that question was how quickly should we reach balanced spending? You supported the Ryan budget, which I think takes 25 years to reach that goal. Is that a realistic time frame, or should it be shorter?
Well, one thing I am definitely concerned about is making sure that Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security are solvent. And I want to make sure that those 55 and older have no changes in their Medicare system, but that going to those younger, that we make sure it's solvent for them too. So the problem is, we didn't get into this situation in 1 year. We didn't get in 2 years. It's taken a lot of years. And I think what it's going to take is a number of years. Now, the Ryan budget, it takes up to 25 years, but the more jobs we have, the more jobs we're created, the more we vote to increase the amount of jobs, the faster the deficit will go down. And I think we should be able to push from anything from 25 to less, but we better have a goal.
Congresswoman Sutton, what about a time frame?
As I said, I would tie the reduction in the deficit reduction timeline to drops in unemployment. My opponent says that he's not about raising taxes. Well, he's certainly not about allowing those tax cuts for the super wealthy to expire. But that same budget that protects those tax cuts puts a hard hit on our working families. And it frankly drives up costs for our seniors. It ends Medicare as we know it, turning it into a voucher program. The independent estimates show that it would cost our seniors up to $6,400 on average under that budget. I think that those at the top need to pay a fair share so that all the burden doesn't fall on our working families and our seniors.
Thank you. Along the lines of finance and the budget, do each of you support a grand bargain on the budget? And if so, what are your must-haves regarding taxes and spending cuts? Congresswoman Sutton, you can start with that.
I think that the grand bargain looks like something that I just described. You know, we hear a lot in Washington that, that Republicans are focused on the deficit. Well, we all agree we have a long-term deficit problem, and we all have to responsibly address it. We also, and I just heard my opponent say that the key to that is getting people back to work, so that's where I would focus. So if I was the person in charge of everything, what I would say is to Democrats, you go out and you come up with a full employment plan. And Republicans, you focus on how we reduce this deficit. And frankly, it doesn't have to be Democrats and Republicans, because as I say, we have these mutual interests. We could sit down together and take that approach. Let's get a full employment plan, tie the reductions in unemployment to the reductions to the deficit and how we're going to get there. Building consensus to an end. It's a great thing. I've seen success in doing it, in putting people to work through the CARS Act and in manufacturing, and I know that we could do it and come up with that right bargain for the American people.
Congressman Renacci, your thought on a grand bargain.
Well, I am a believer in a grand bargain, and I think we do need to work together. The only problem is I think we need to work together and make sure that whatever we do, it's all about jobs. It's about those 23 million people that are unemployed looking for work. It's about the 47 million people that are on food stamps. We need to make sure we start looking toward jobs, jobs, jobs. At the same time, why would you tax? Why would you increase taxes on people that create jobs? You know, one thing my opponent and I definitely agree on. We should never raise taxes on anyone during a recession. She voted for that in 2010. She agreed. She voted not to increase the taxes on anyone and to extend the tax rates. She did the right thing because back then, the growth of our country was not even, our growth is even less today. So I do agree with her on that. We should be voting to make sure we don't raise taxes on anyone in the time of a recession.
Follow-up question to that. The fiscal cliff, it's been called, is coming up at the end of the year, and that would involve spending cuts, sequestered cuts that were agreed to in the 2011 budget, as well as the rollback of tax cuts as well. I wonder if you, Congressman Renacci, would support a temporary measure to avert the cuts and the changes in the tax code until a deal could be reached. Are you in favor of a temporary stopgap once again?
Absolutely. Look, I'm in favor of not temporary, though. I believe we need to extend the tax cuts for at least 3, 4, 5 years to bring certainty and predictability back to the workplace. We need to be able to extend them and move forward, because if we're going to bring certainty and predictability, we need to do that sooner than later. So I am in favor of that. I think we need to move forward and make sure that no one, especially in a recession, in the time of a recession, even President Obama agreed with that in 2010, along with my opponent. In a time of recession, we should never raise taxes on anyone. I believe we should have a long-term plan, and we should also do tax reform, ultimately a tax reform plan over that extension period.
Congresswoman Sutton, your thoughts on that, given that the election is in early November, there'll be a couple of months to perhaps divert from going over the cliff. Would you endorse a short-term proposal?
I voted against the sequestration in the first instance because I knew it would get us right into this place. I think it's really important that I set the record straight. My opponent talks about why I voted for the extension of the tax cuts for the super wealthy, and I'll tell you why. Because the controlling bloc in the House of Representatives that my opponent is a part of held it hostage. And you know what they did? They held the middle class tax cuts hostage to those tax cuts for the super wealthy. I think they should have expired then, and by the way, they've been in effect. So where are the jobs? Where are the jobs from the job creators? Let's put more money into the hands of the middle class, which the budget, the Ryan budget that you supported, does not do. It actually takes away important deductions like the home interest or the home mortgage interest deduction and the earned income tax credit. So I think it's all about helping the job creators, but it's the middle class that is the engine of job creation.
Moving on to the next question. What are your specific proposals regarding entitlement obligations such as Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, and how do you differ from your opponent? Where do you see room for compromise? Congressman Renacci?
First off, I do want to go back because it's amazing. My opponent, we talk about political rhetoric. She voted to extend the tax cuts when the House was controlled by the Democrats, not when the House was controlled by the Republicans. I mean, how can you say we held it back? She had all the cards. But when it comes to entitlements, I believe we need to make sure that entitlement reform is around so that Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid are here for everyone. I think we need to make sure, look, my opponent, what has she done? There's two choices. She's voted to do nothing. We know what happens if you do nothing. If you do nothing right now, Medicare will be insolvent. Social Security will be insolvent in 20-some plus years. These are things we can't do. We need to make sure we reform it so that everyone has health Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security for our future generations.
Congresswoman Sutton.
Well, my opponent and I disagree greatly on this, and it's reflected in the fact that I got a 100% score from the Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare, and my opponent got a 0. The reality of this is that, you know, my opponent voted to end Medicare as we know it, turn it into a voucher program, cause seniors to have to pay more with no guarantee that they would get the care that they needed. I think that that is the wrong approach. I think we need to cut out waste and fraud and abuse and from the provider side and not hurt those benefits. I think we need to continue to close that donut hole, not leaving our senior citizens in a lurch, choosing between medicine and food, something that my opponent has voted to allow to come back in full bloom. I also think that, you know, that working families and most people pay on 100% of their income for Social Security. And once again, if 94% are paying on 100% of their income, why shouldn't those at the very top also do it? Because that would make Social Security solvent for a very long time into the future.
Moving on to the next topic. You both have widely divergent views on the benefits of the Patient Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, which even the President is referring to it now. In what way specifically are the changes brought by Obamacare an improvement over the previous system, or conversely, are they making things worse? We'll start with you, Congresswoman Sutton.
I think it was very important that we push back on the abuses by the insurance industry, the discrimination against people based on pre-existing conditions, the arbitrary lifetime caps that were keeping people who are facing disease or sickness from getting the care that they need because of those annual and lifetime caps. I also think it's important that now students can stay on their parents' insurance coverage until the age of 26, and that we close that donut hole that was hurting our seniors and making them make untenable choices that we are too great of a country for them to have to make. So there are a lot of things that are good. There are a lot of things that need to continue to be improved. We have to continue to roll back and reduce the cost curve on health care. We also strengthened the solvency of Medicare through that bill. So there are a lot of things that happen. People are actually now in the medical industry making money, keeping people well because of the preventative services that they can now get, the cancer screenings that I am such a supporter of. So those are some of the things that are good about the bill, and that's certainly why I supported it.
Congressman Renacci, you ran on a viewpoint of repealing Obamacare. So let's hear your viewpoint on that.
Sure. Well, I ran on a viewpoint of representing the people in my district, which the majority wanted to be repealed. But the other thing that's very important about it, it did nothing, absolutely nothing to bring costs down. We know that for a fact. The President said that costs would come down by $2,000 per year. They've gone up by $2,000 per year. Now, there were some good things in the bill, pre-existing conditions. I agree with some of those things. But we could have done that in 4 or 5 pages. We don't need to throw a 2,400-page bill on the table and say we need to pass it to know what's in it. And then look at what is in it year after year after year. Two things that are in it for sure. $718 billion was taken out of Medicare. If you talk about changing Medicare as we know it forever, $718 billion was taken out of Medicare to help pay for Obamacare. That's a fact. And the other thing is, we have a 15-member board, unelected officials that will make health care decisions in the future. Those are the 2 things that have changed Medicare forever that have been part of Obamacare.
Follow up to that, you said $718 billion is taken out of Medicare, and that's a fact. Fact-checking organizations would disagree with you on that, and would also say that in Paul Ryan's budget plan, there's a very similar accounting measure. What's your thought on that? Why do you call it a cut from Medicare?
Well, it is a cut. If you're going to take $718 billion out of the system, if you call Medicaid a system, again, I'm a CPA. If you take $718 billion out, it's a cut. Now, let's face it, Paul Ryan had to develop a budget based on those cuts. Those cuts are law. So his budget now has taken those out. There's no doubt about that. His budget has taken those out because it was a cut in the law already. But We can dice it, slice it, spin it any way you want. $1,718 billion was taken out of the system. My opponent will say, it was taken from insurance companies. It was taken from Medicare Advantage. It was taken from Medicare.
Congresswoman Sutton, you have 30 seconds on that as well.
I appreciate the question, and let's just be very, very, very clear. My opponent says he wanted to stop the discrimination based on pre-existing conditions, but he has voted repeatedly to have it reinstated. He is a member of the majority party of the House of Representatives. He can offer up different things. It's part of our responsibility to make things work, and sometimes that means moving your own people in the House of Representatives. You know, if anyone in this room, and I appreciate the problem, and I think we have to continue to work on bringing down health care costs, but if there's anyone here listening who thinks that health care costs were not going up before we passed a health care bill, I would be very, very surprised. I recently stood at an opening of a wellness center where it has affected the way of doing business, because the folks who built that wellness center actually said, before the health care bill, I had to make money treating people who were sick. But now I can make money by keeping people well. I think that's the right way to turn.
I'm going to ask a final question before I ask Jim Foster to come back up with some important announcements, and then we'll move into the audience question portion of our debate today. The final question is about the district in which you're running. The redrawing of Ohio's congressional districts by legislative Republicans has been called obscene by many political observers who see clear evidence of gerrymandering. And I wonder if you agree with that assessment, and if you do you support State Issue 2, an amendment to the state constitution changing the process? If you don't support that, what other changes would you advocate to draw congressional districts like the one you're running in? Jim Renacci?
Well, first off, I believe the congressional districts, I'm not happy with the way they were drawn, but you know who we turn around and should chastise for? Those that did it. We have elected officials that did it, and if you're concerned about the way it was drawn, you talk to the elected officials, and if you don't like their answers, then you change elected officials. That's the answer. The answer isn't to put an unelected board in place that's going to cost millions of dollars to set up, to sponsor, to move forward with, to change the system. But you know what? We have to live with the system. We have to live, and I guess 10 years ago it was an issue. What we need to do is get out and meet people. I think if my opponent would spend more time, out there talking to businesses, she'd find out that healthcare costs have gone up. I've had over 100 meetings with businesses, not only in the old district, but in the new district, because I think that's important. We're representing them. Talk to them and find out exactly what healthcare costs are. That's the key.
Congresswoman Sutton?
Thank you. I support Issue 2. And it's interesting to hear my opponent say these things here today, because my opponent wasn't chastising the folks who were drawing the districts in his favor. He was communicating with them, finding out how much of my district would actually be included in his district to make sure that that advantage was still there. There's a report that shows this. I didn't see the chastising when the Speaker of the House, in a matter of minutes, turned around on behalf of my opponent to make sure that a big contributor was looped in, the only place in Canton, Ohio, that was looped into the 16th District, a big contributor for my opponent. So it is interesting to hear this. You know what? People deserve better. They deserve districts where they know their representatives, who they are, and what they're about, and they deserve better than the charade that was just offered up in that answer.
All right, given that answer, I'm going to ask you, Mr. Renacci, to respond in 30 seconds. The follow-up question would be to respond to that.
Sure. Well, it's amazing. You heard on the debates about facts. My opponent may own her house, but she definitely doesn't own the facts. There is no fact that will ever show that Jim Renacci was involved with redistricting. If Jim Renacci was involved with redistricting, I guarantee you the redistricting would not have been the way they were. I was the first one that was shocked when I found out the way the districts are. So it's very difficult for my opponent to say something like that. I'd love to hear her facts on that. I'm sure she doesn't have it because it's factless.
Thank you very much. That'll conclude this portion of our debate. And here is Jim Foster from the City Club with some very important announcements.
There'll be brief announcements. Thank you. In a minute, we will have the traditional City Club audience question and answer period. To the audience, thank you in advance for your cooperation by making your questions, stating them as briefly and clearly as possible. We would like to thank our many generous supporters who have purchased tables today. Please refer to your program. There's a list of the table holders. Thank you very much. Today is the annual Peter de Leon Endowed Forum on Local Politics. Peter was a long-time and much beloved City Club member. He was a member of the City Club for more than 50 years. Joining us at the head table today is Paulette Novak, daughter of Peter de Leon. Paulette? Thank you. And now with these truncated announcements, I'll turn the podium back over to Mike and the audience for questions directly from the audience. They'll be moderated by Mike. Let's have the first question, please.
But before we do take that question, I do want to make the admonition that we would really love this to be in the form of a question. And I know that many of us here would have come to support your candidate and have some comments to make as well, but I implore you to ask a question. We're not going to be having any attacks or really any speeches here from the audience, but we would love to hear from you, full house, and let's go ahead and have our first question.
Good afternoon, and thank you for coming. I would ask both of you to comment on this, please. I am the owner of a small manufacturing company with 62 employees, and I've been excluded from all the small business deals that take place. I would like to understand how both of you feel regarding the escalating regulations that were bad enough under the prior administration, but are frankly staggering under this current administration with some of the things that have been passed over the last 4 years.
Thank you, sir. And as a reminder, each of the candidates will have 1 minute to deliver an answer to the question that was asked of both of them. Congressman Renacci, you can begin.
Sure. Well, again, I always say it's all about certainty and predictability, and you heard me early on talk about we have to make sure tax rates, that small businesses understand what their tax rates are. We also have to let small businesses understand what their regulations are. The problem is regulations are growing and growing and growing, and we don't replace the old ones. The old ones stay there, and we just add more and more and more on. You know, we had a bill in the House that my opponent did not go along with and pass, but we did get it out of the House. It's sitting there, has not been touched by the Senate yet, which basically says, such common sense, it just says, if unemployment doesn't drop below 6%, we should not add another regulation. Isn't that a common sense idea? Do not add another regulation until we get unemployment below 6%. If we look at things like that, it's common sense ideas, we can take advantage of making sure small business owners like yourself understand what it is. And then we have to be able to look at all regulations and make sure we had another bill that basically said if it exceeds $100 million of economic growth, they have to come and explain to Congress. We're part of the oversight. We should actually be able to hear why they're doing some of these regulations.
Congresswoman Sutton.
Thank you, and thank you for the question. I would love to talk to you after this because we only have a little bit of time here to hear more about what your situation is. Certainly, small businesses are an important part of our economic recovery, and we have to make sure that we have regulations that are effective and smart, but not overly burdensome. I think that the approach that my opponent just pointed out with that legislation that passed the House is a good example of the differences between us. I think that it is irresponsible to say that we should just not pass any regulations, no matter what they are, without having to look carefully at what they are. For example, a good example of why is this. We are all aware of the danger that we face with the invasive species, the Asian carp, that right now we are racing against the clock to keep out of our Great Lakes. And you know why it's important to do that? Not only because of, it's an environmental asset that we have, but it's an economic engine. There are a lot of jobs that would be at risk if we were to just sit on our hands because we passed some arbitrary, overreaching bill that says no regulations without thought. Everything just stops. That's not responsible. So I think smart regulations, effective regulations, get rid of ones that don't work and we don't need. But you can't just have this simplistic approach that says get rid of them all. We have to do our job and look carefully.
Next question, please.
I have a question about veterans, military families, and soldiers. Can you, and this is for both candidates, can you say very specifically what you have voted for or against while you have been in office that affects military families, veterans, or soldiers?
Let me start with Congresswoman Sutton and switch up the order a little bit here.
Thank you. There are a number of things, and frankly, there are not enough things that we could do to help our veterans and call it a day, because their service is amazing and what has made this country all that it is. I've been proud to support the GI Bill. I've been proud to, in my first year, stand up and make sure that the VA was finally fully funded. I've been proud to work to pass the stop-loss protections, a bill that I introduced that made sure that our troops who are being sent on repeated and extended tours of duty would get fair compensation. I have been proud to fight for VA benefits and making sure that clinics stayed open in our neighborhoods, working with some of the men right here in this room who have proudly served us. I have been proud at every turn to do all that I can. I've even gone so far as to not only provide opportunities to bring resources to help our homeless veterans, but gone out and worked with my staff. We have actually gone to the Habitat for Humanity, and we've worked together to build a shelter, because we are too great of a country to have veterans who are homeless in this great country.
Congressman Renacci.
Well, I will tell you this, as a son of a World War II veteran, a family that has 7 or 8 uncles, cousins serving in the military, I believe that we need to support our military 100%. I believe that we need to make sure they have everything they need, from their equipment, their pay, and when they come home, they need to have jobs. We need to make sure that they have jobs. And I've supported every program in Congress since I've been there to make sure that we can continue to support our veterans. I just passed it just came out of the House, a piece of legislation that actually removes how they calculate revenue for homeless veterans, so that homeless veterans can be afforded the opportunity of HUD financing to not be homeless anymore. This was just a recent bill that I passed, because I believe we need to stand with our military 100%.
Thank you. Next question, sir.
Welcome to the City Club. I would like to find out what your background is, Ms. Sutton, and this is for both of you actually, but I think the law was passed by Ms. Sutton. What your background is in the automotive industry to pass the cash for clunkers, and your comment on that, Congressman Renacci.
And if you have a question in the audience, and I saw a couple of people trying to signal me, you'll need to just grab one of the folks with a microphone, and they're both standing around here now. And let's start with you on this answer, Congressman Renacci.
Well, again, here's an example of, we have Washington passing bills. We have Washington passing bills, but don't understand what the results of them are. My opponent will tell you about this award and that award. Let me tell you the facts. The facts are that, and I've got it right here, the Department of Labor showed that in August of 2009, 15,000 jobs were lost. This is the Department of Labor. 15,000 jobs were lost in automotive, manufacturing, and parts because of the economy at that time and what was going on. My opponent will tell you it worked. 15,000 jobs were lost. I was a car dealer. I understand what happened. We had car sales, new car sales in the six districts, in the county, 6 districts. For the first 6 months, 4,500 new vehicles were sold. During the time of Cash for Clunkers, it went up to the average of 5,900. Guess what happened after Cash for Clunkers? It dropped all the way down to 3,700. If you take the 15-month period of Cash for Clunkers, we didn't sell any more cars than we did 2 years prior. That's a problem. And here's the worst part about Cash for Clunkers. It raised the cost of used cars by 9 to 11%. It made the working poor. It put a tax on the working poor. It should have never happened. They now have to pay 9 to 11% more for a used car. And for the farmers in Wayne County, they can't even find used cars.
Congresswoman Sutton.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that my opponent thinks that this bill was about him. It was called the CARS Act, but it was about people. It was about the families that work in our auto and related industries. And every study out there, and I didn't hear any studies, I just heard my opponent's opinion. Every study out there has shown that this program was a timely, temporary, targeted stimulus that worked. Accounted for 60,000 jobs. It didn't solve every problem we had, but before it happened, there were no car sales happening. And when it started happening, guess what? We saw dealerships empty. I did get the Distinguished Service Award from the Ohio Automobile Dealers Association, which I believe my opponent is a member of. I also was named a U.S. Automotive All-Star by U.S. Automotive News. But it wasn't about the awards. It was about the families who now had a paycheck. It was about the parts suppliers. It was about the money coming into our communities. It was about the firefighters we were able to hire and the police officers and the teachers who we need. So.
Just a follow-up to that for a 30-second response, and you can both take a shot at that. Moving it beyond the cash for clunkers, Congressman Renacci, do you believe that there is any government-backed bailout plans or stimulus packages that are worth pursuing? Did any of them work, and are you in favor of stimulus and bailout?
Well, the one thing I will tell you, and I got to keep going back, my opponent here seems to not want to ever talk about facts. She says that, I just gave her facts. I can hold these up, I'll pass them out to her after about the number of jobs that were provided for cars for clunkers. So we've got to keep to the facts. And when you talk about bailouts, my opponent bailed out the banks. And then she turned around and voted for Dodd-Frank. Now think about it. We bail out the banks, and then we vote for Dodd-Frank, which now names 5 banks as too big to fail, which means the federal government will make sure they don't fail again. These are the kind of bailouts we cannot continue to move forward with.
Congresswoman Sutton, 30 seconds.
Thank you. The information I provided about the CARES Act, I'll be happy to provide. You're absolutely right. I voted for Dodd-Frank because I think that the reckless behavior that you're trying to take us back to, especially in your role on the committee that oversees these things, is what got us into the problem in the first place. The Wild West attitude of Wall Street cannot be allowed to be reinstated. It drove our economy off the cliff, and then people tried to punish our workers, but they weren't the ones who drove our economy off the cliff. Neither were our senior citizens, and yet that's where the budget goes to recoup. It's time for us to have responsible regulation that makes sense.
For that answer. Thank you very much. Final question, and I'll be asking that question. As we mentioned earlier, you each have 3 minutes to both answer the question and make your closing remarks. Mr. Renacci, you talk a lot about a bipartisan group you're a member of, 16 Congress members, 8 Republicans, 8 Democrats. And Betty Sutton, you talk a lot about reaching across the aisle on legislation such as cash for clunkers. Surely no single party can have all the good ideas. I wondered what you've heard from your colleagues on the other side of the aisle that makes sense. And what are you doing specifically to bring governance instead of gridlock to the nation's capital? And I think we flipped ahead of time, and the first response, final response, will go to Congresswoman Sutton.
Thank you very much for the question. And I think building those relationships is important. But I also think it's not just about who you sit down with, it's about who you stand up for. This race is not just about who's going to be the representative from the 16th District. It's about who's going to be represented in the 16th District. My whole life has been about standing up for the middle class and those who aspire to it. I've stood up to special interests and politicians who have violated the public trust, whether they're Democrats or they're Republicans. I have stood up to protect Medicare and Social Security, earning that endorsement of the Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare. I've stood up for our troops and our veterans, and I've reached across the aisle to pass legislation, not just the CARES Act, but the stop-loss protections and other things as well. Because I know that people deserve a government not on their back, but definitely deserve a government on their side. And that's what I will always fight to give them. It's who I am and it's what I'm about. I think if you work hard in this country, you should be able to make it. I recently got an email from a woman who lives in Copley, a single mom, 2 kids, her oldest daughter at the University of Cincinnati, her youngest at Copley High School. She talked about how she goes crazy when she sees the commercials that say that things aren't getting better in her life because in 2005, her husband left her. Hadn't paid any child support until recently. She was making $8,000 a year. She tried to get a Pell Grant, but the funding wasn't there then. She wanted to make things better for her family, but it wasn't there. And she had a pre-existing condition, Crohn's disease, that was in remission, but still caused a lot of health care bills because she needed checkups. And insurance companies were discriminating against her. They were devastating her family. She wrote to me to tell me that her family is better off now than they were. Her oldest daughter graduated from Copley High School, off to college. The Pell Grant funding that we expanded made a difference in her life. She works now at a clinic assisting MS patients with their daily needs and their chores, and she says, I love my job. I've been able to afford new school shoes and supplies for my youngest daughter, and she's going to travel to Florida with the marching band, and I've been able to make the payments because I got a better job. And she no longer has to ask her in-laws for handouts. And she is also happy to report that she got federal aid and is now going to college, making her dream of an education come true because she's going to be a social worker. And so she just wanted to tell us that her family is better off. She's doing everything right. She's playing by the rules. And I think that she deserves someone on her side. And I think middle-class families throughout the 16th District deserve someone who's going to be there in Washington looking out for them, because the special interest and self-serving politicians have enough people looking out for them. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman Sutton. And Mr. Renacci, Congressman Renacci, to restate the question, no single party can have all the good ideas. What have you heard from your colleagues on the other side of the aisle that makes sense to you? And what are you doing specifically to bring governance instead of gridlock to the nation's capital?
Well, it's interesting because you talk about my bipartisan group, and I'm very proud of that. One thing, though, I do want to go back. The Congresswoman talked about Dodd-Frank and the runaway train. I wasn't even in Congress at that time, what she's talking about. So it's interesting. We've got to stay with facts. But the truth about bipartisanship, we've got to work on bipartisanship. I'm so proud that I had a member from the other side come up to me and say, in one of my finance meetings, financial service meeting, you know what, Renacci, you seem to be a person who wants to get things done. You seem to be a person who wants to work together. You're not throwing stones at the other side. I think it's great. Can I talk to, can we get together? I said, let's have breakfast. That breakfast turned into another breakfast with 6 guys, 12 guys, now 16 people. 16 people who work together. We have 5 pieces of legislation out there. Each one of them is helpful to the middle class, the upper class, all of the American class. And that's what we have to look at. And what I've learned from them is I've learned that you can work side by side with people with different ideas. When the one congressman said to me from the other side, do you understand that the biggest problem is the 11th year? It's the 11th year when you do budgeting. Everybody throws things into the 11th year. I said, I didn't. But it was a learning experience for me, and I was able to say, you know what, we need to change that. So we have a bill out there that changes budgeting process. It's the kind of things we can do working together. And I got to tell you, in closing, this race is about views. This race is about 2 polar opposites. There's no doubt about it. You heard that today. This race really, though, is about the 23 million people that are looking for jobs. It's about the 47 million people, and I got to continue to talk about those that are on food stamps, and the 50 million people now that are poor. This is what this race is about. And it's about making sure people know the differences between the two of us. And I'll tell you a little story. Yesterday, I had the honor of going to a firefighters awards dinner that I gave out some awards. I was a firefighter for 5 years. So I was in Canton, Ohio. I sat down at the table. The guy across the table from me I was honoring his daughter for their essay. And he says, he told his little granddaughter, you tell him we don't vote for Republicans. You tell him we don't vote for Republicans. And I thought, well, it's going to be a tough table. So what I did is I started to talk to him. He was 84 years old. And I had the opportunity to sit with him for about an hour and a half. And we talked about family. We talked about background. We talked about a lot of things. We talked about my vision. We talked about his vision. His wife was a nurse. He was in a union. We talked about the differences. And then he said, you know what, I heard a lot of things about you, but I've heard them all on TV, and they're all bad. And I says, well, that's one of the problems in elections. We've got to learn to hear things directly from the people. That's what this is about. It's about people making the decisions based on the differences between the two of us. I am so proud that when I stood up from that table and walked away, he came running after me, shook my hand and said, you know what, I've never voted for a Republican, but I'm voting for you this time. And my wife is too. I think that's what this election is all about. Making sure that people get to know who you are, get to know what your differences are, and then make the decision. I hope I've earned your vote. November 6th is coming close, and I hope I can have your vote in the next few weeks. Thank you so much.
I want to say thank you to both of our candidates. I think I join everybody in the room based on that applause. Thank you to both of you for a really enlightening discussion. This is exactly what the City Club is meant to be, a citadel of free speech. I appreciate the enlightened discussion. And here's a shameless self-promotion. If you're still interested in more information on what both of these candidates have to say, there'll be guests on my program, The Sound of Ideas, on 90.3 on Monday, the 15th of October, 9 o'clock in the morning on 90.3. You can listen on WCPN.org as well and get more of your questions answered. And now, Jim Foster from the City Club.
Today at the City Club, we've been listening to a City Club debate between Congressman Jim Renacci and Congresswoman Betty Sutton, the two candidates vying to represent Ohio's 16th District. Thank you to IdeaStream for their broadcast support. Thank you, Mike McIntyre, for moderating. Thank you, audience, for your questions and support. This forum is now adjourned.